Welcome, infidels. Today we're going to talk about the ancient Israelites, also called the Hebrews or the Jews. They are the first messengers of the one true God. As always, listen to this presentation and look over the pre-readings before showing this to your child. Also be aware that this presentation is a little bit big. So I've actually split it into two parts. This is part one. And for part one, I'm going to cover the beginning of the Jews and go through their arrival in the Promised Land. For part two, I'm going to start with the Judges and go through their time of Jesus until the fall of Israel in 70 AD. Here are the pre-readings, previewings. We're going to read the section on the Hebrews from the Dorothy Mills book. There's also a wonderful article entitled Isaac and Ishmael, Understanding the Origins of the Middle Eastern Conflict and the Foundation for Eschatology. There's a great animated movie from the 90s called The Prince of Egypt. It's on Netflix, not required, but do check it out if you have time. So why are we studying the Jews if the point is to understand Allah and what the Muslims are trying to do to us infidels? Because the conflict that we're seeing today actually starts in the family of Abraham. We're going to see that in a minute when we take a look at his family. The Jews are arguably the most persecuted people on earth, and it's been that way since their creation. Christians are a very close second. And the Jewish people, they are the only civilization to fall, be completely destroyed, and then be restored again. They fell in 70 AD, and then they were restored as a nation after World War II in 1948. And they even get a little bit more land in the 60s. 50% of who we are as Westerners comes from the Jews. So our morals and our sense of right and wrong, it comes from them. Our love of philosophy, beauty, and democratic politics comes from the Greco-Roman or classical civilization. So it's important to understand the Jews if we're going to understand ourselves. This is Israel through the years. Its borders do change a little bit, but you can see that it always includes this area along the sea. To this day, the territory is contested, but that's a conversation for another day. The map that they have today is very close to this map. They gave up this little bit of land in exchange for peace. Again, a whole other conversation. And they also have this gray area here. So it's kind of close to between here and here is what they have. You can't understand the Jewish people without understanding Yahweh or their God. Yahweh is the most commonly known name. It's also a secret name for him, so Jewish people, you won't hear them saying it too often these days. They like to refer to him as Hashem, sometimes Jehovah. He's angry and jealous, but also very forgiving and loving. His anger is spurred by immorality and the death of innocents, particularly children. He does not like child sacrifice. His goal is the salvation of his creation, and his goal is for mankind to have a peaceful existence on earth. He is in conflict with Lucifer, fallen angel, and his followers, so that sometimes makes his goals a little bit difficult. That we have free will, but that's a whole other conversation. All right, so Abraham is the very beginning of the Jewish people, and also the Arabs too. What's happening here is that Abraham is getting ready to sacrifice his son Isaac to Yahweh. At the last minute, an angel stops him and points to a ram that is caught in the bushes and says, "No, don't sacrifice your child, sacrifice this ram instead." And from this point on, child sacrifice is forbidden in Judaism. So Abraham's whole purpose in life is to be the father of the Jewish people. God gives him a promise. He says, "I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, and you, all the nations of the earth, shall be blessed." So you can see in this political cartoon here, there's a lot of people kind of against him, a lot of politicians here. And here's the Prime Minister of Israel, and God's hand is behind him. The other piece of this is that as Israel is blessed, as they develop new technology, they have wealth, etc., they are supposed to share it with the rest of the world. And we are starting to see a lot of really cool stuff come out of Israel, a lot of technology that the rest of the world is starting to benefit from. Okay, so again, Abraham's a dad, and he has two sons. Despite this promise in the beginning, years and years and years go by and it doesn't happen. So Sarah, his wife, she becomes impatient. Maybe she misunderstands the prophecy. I don't know. She tells him to go have relations with her slave maiden Hagar. And through this event, we're given Ishmael. It's not until 14 years later that Sarah finally gives birth to Isaac. So, as a result, Abraham has two sons with two very different destinies. Isaac's destiny is to be the father of the Jewish people. Ishmael's destiny is to be the father of the Arabs. And there is a prophecy concerning the Arabs. We're going to see here in just a second. So after Hagar gets pregnant, the relationship between Sarah and Hagar starts to deteriorate. And Hagar actually runs away a couple of times. The first time she runs away, she's pregnant. And an angel comes to her and says, "Don't worry, you'll be okay, and your child will be fine too. He won't be the father of the Jews, but the Lord will make him into a great nation. He will also be like a wild ass, and every man's hand shall be against him, and his hand shall be against every man." Translation, he will be a big problem for everyone. And it's worth noting that when she first runs away, she does go back to Sarah eventually. The last time she leaves the household, Ishmael is around 14, 15 years old, and they are turned out for good at that time. Okay, I'm going to focus on the Jews for the duration of this presentation, for the remainder of it. So the patriarchs are the fathers of the Jews. Okay, we already talked about Abraham and Isaac. And Isaac, in turn, has Jacob, who gives way to Joseph. And Joseph is the favorite son of Jacob. But Jacob actually has 12 other brothers, or 12 other sons. And those 12 other sons get a little jealous of Joseph, because they can tell that he's daddy's favorite. What ends up happening is his brothers actually capture him and sell him into slavery, and the slave traders take him into Egypt. Despite being a slave in Egypt, or at least starting off as a slave, Joseph gains some prominence in Egypt. He actually ends up interpreting some dreams for the Pharaoh and helps save Egypt from a famine. This famine makes its way up to Israel, and the 12 brothers that sold Joseph into slavery end up fleeing into Egypt to escape the famine, and they're reunited there as a family. Joseph forgives his brothers, and they all live happily ever after for a while. But as years and years and years go by and Joseph passes away, the Egyptians forget about him and all the wonderful things that he did for Egypt, and the Hebrews multiply extensively and they become enslaved. The huge numbers of the Hebrews make the Egyptians nervous, and this results in an order going out to kill all the male Hebrew babies. Moses does escape. He's pulled from the water by Pharaoh's daughter. His birth mother sticks him in a basket and floats him down the river to where Pharaoh's daughter is hanging out with her handmaidens. She discovers him, pulls him from the water, and decides to take him on as her own. He grows up, sees the oppression of his people, murders an Egyptian, runs away into the desert where he encounters a burning bush that God uses to speak to him. God tells him to lead the Jews out of Egypt. The 10 plagues ensue. And it's from this event that the festival of Passover is born, because Passover is the night that the Lord killed the firstborn of the Egyptians, but passed over the Hebrews. It was the last of the 10 plagues. So once Moses leads the Hebrews out of Egypt, this is not the end of their troubles. They do wander for 40 years in the desert. Moses is not allowed to enter the promised land. He can only look at it. And when they get there, the Phoenicians are already living there. Remember those guys? Those were the guys that burned their children to Baal. During the course of the 40 years, Moses is given the law and the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Bible, and the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. For those of you who say there's no evidence of this event, take a look at this video. This is a bunch of short videos put together by some divers that have been exploring this area. And they've discovered a couple different things, some weird coral formations. What happens with coral is it attaches to an object like a rock or maybe a sunken ship or a pirate chest or something like that, and it kind of grows in the shape of whatever it's attached to. So that even when the object, say like a wooden chest, deteriorates or it decomposes, the coral is left in the shape of the object that it was originally clinging to. So this almost looks like an overturned chariot wheel. And then there's actually some gold that they found at the bottom of the sea too. Check it out, it's pretty cool. So once the Hebrews received the Ten Commandments, they put them inside this gold box called the Ark of the Covenant. It had similar properties to a weapon in the Bible. There is even a movie called Raiders of the Lost Ark with Harrison Ford, which is where I got this screenshot from. Indiana Jones, what he does is he goes in and tries to get this thing before the Nazis do, because the Nazis want to use it as a weapon. And the interesting thing about this object is that you could not touch it. If you notice, Indiana Jones and his friend over here, they're using wooden poles to lift the ark. They're not actually touching it. If you touched it, it would kill you. There's actually a story in the Bible about the priest Uzzah reaching out to kind of steady the ark. It looked like it was going to fall, and he put his hand on it, and it killed him instantly. That is in 2 Samuel 6:7. To this day, we don't know where the Ark of the Covenant is. Raiders of the Lost Ark said it was in Egypt, but there's also a legend that says it's in Ethiopia, that the Queen of Sheba took it down there after a visit with King Solomon. Some people say it's buried under the Temple Mount. No one really knows. Okay, so we talked about Passover. And the thing to understand about Passover is it is the root of Christ the Last Supper and the remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. Jewish people and some Catholics observe this. There's a special meal, and the different items on a special plate represent different things. I'll let you kind of read over that. Ideally, Passover should start a day or two before Easter, but this is not always the case. The Gregorian calendar that the Christian world followed, it's not usually in sync with the Jewish calendar. No risen bread is allowed anywhere in the home during Passover. And again, there is a connection between Passover and Christ. So the big reason that the early Christians, who were Jews, basically began to believe in Jesus is that he was slaughtered around Passover. The Jews would take a pure lamb and slaughter it around Passover for sin. John the Baptist even said when he first saw Jesus, "Behold, the Lamb of God." So that was acknowledgement that he was to be the atonement for sin. Here's some Passover plates. You can see that the 6 items go here. And here's matzo bread, which Jews like to eat during Passover. And the reason that they eat this is that it does not have any yeast in it. The whole thing about the Exodus is that they were told to leave so quickly that they did not have time to let the bread rise. So they had to just grab it off the stones and eat it as it was, basically like a flat cracker. They had to leave that quickly from Egypt. So I realize a lot of Protestant churches will use any kind of bread for communion, but the more ancient churches like the Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, Coptic, Christians, etc., they will use a special kind of bread or cracker, if you will, called host. And that's what this is. And it is unleavened. There's no yeast in it. They believe that the Spirit of Christ literally comes and resides in this thing. And it's a nod basically to our Jewish roots, the Jewish roots of Christianity. Here is a Jew celebrating Passover with his friends. I bet you know who this guy is. I know I normally include sources at the end of my videos, but I will go ahead and end this presentation here, include my sources in the next video. However, if you are very eager to see them, please let me know, and I'll try to get them to you sooner. Until then, thanks for watching, Infidels.